It has been 6 long years since the Revolutionary War. But now what? How would America lead itself and govern itself? How would it deal with dissension and disagreements among the states, handle and resolve conflicts, and ultimately not fall apart? These were the questions facing our founding fathers when they wrote the Constitution.
Most people, when they think of the Constitution, think that it was written at the same time as the Declaration of Independence, and that it was smooth sailing from there. In reality, what actually happened was almost the exact opposite. The founding founders never intended to make the Constitution at all in the first place. Instead, everyone thought that the Articles of the Confederation, the document that made binding them together during the war against Britain, would be their main document going forward, and that's it. And yet, it was made quite clear that the articles wouldn't work to govern an entire nation during the time. They were never written with this in mind. The articles worked fine when all the states had a common enemy to rally against, but when there was none, they had no way of dealing with the internal conflict between the different states.
After multiple disagreements over land, trade, and a rebellion or two, the founding fathers all came to an agreement that something needed to be done. Originally, it was planned for representatives of each state to meet in Philadelphia on May 14th to amend the Articles of Confederation. Unfortunately, due to difficulty of traveling that day, just about everyone would be arriving late, except for James Madison, who happened to live close by. This delay gave him more than enough time to write up his plan, or as it came to be known, the Virginia Plan.
The Virginia Plan would do away the Articles of Confederation and instead set up a strong central government. It would be split up into 3 branches: the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary, or the ones that we know today. They would attempt to split up the governmental powers equally among the 3 branches. It would be a series of checks and balances, if you may will. The first, judiciary, would be a group of supreme courts to interpret the law of the land. The next, the executive, would enforce the law of the land as well as protect the people from foreign powers. Lastly, the legislative would debate upon and make new laws of the land. In the Virginia Plan, the legislative branch would be made up by 2 houses. The lower house, or the Senate, would be made up of state representatives based upon state population, and the upper house would be made up of members who were elected for life by the lower house.
While many of these attributes and ideas can be seen in America today, not everyone agreed with this plan. The biggest disagreement came over the fact that the number of representatives from each state would be based on its population. The smaller states did not like this, as this would mean they would have less say in the Senate. Instead, the smaller states argued that every state should have 1 representative or 1 vote in the Senate. This argument went back and forth with seemingly no end in sight. The smaller states even proposed alternate plans, like the New Jersey plan, which would keep the Articles of Confederation and instead give each state 1 vote in the Senate. However, this was not the only disagreement that came up. They also debated over how the head of the executive branch would work. In other words, what would the role of the president be? Should it just be 1 man or a collection of 3? What would his roles be? Who would appoint the judges of the Supreme Court? There was also the question of slavery. Should it be abolished? Should it be legal? And if so, should they be counted as part of the population, even if they were not thought of as people?
Slavery, surprisingly, was a very controversial subject in those days. Many in the North were calling for an end to it, even though many of the founding fathers actually owned slaves during the time. Morality aside, you have to remember most of the Southern economy was fueled by slave labor. Take out the slaves and you would crash the entire Southern economy. So the South was forced to defend slavery at all costs. This can be clearly seen in the 3/5 compromise, where the question was whether or not slaves should be counted as part of the population If not, the southern states would barely have any population at all.
Unfortunately, most of these disagreements went on with seemingly no end in sight. Many states were even threatening to leave. If they could not come to an agreement, all that they fought for would fall apart. Luckily, in the middle of the summer, one state finally pulled through and found the compromise that would satisfy just about everyone. It would be known as the Connecticut Compromise.
The Connecticut Compromise basically took the New Jersey plan and the Virginia plan and mixed them together, really. There were still two houses in the legislative branch, but one was made up of representatives based upon the populace, and the other was based on geography.
With most of the disagreements sorted out, the Founding Fathers were able to finally draft up a new document for America, the Constitution. Although not signed by everyone, 39 out of the original 55 representatives signed the final draft, officially creating the United States of America. Even with the Constitution, things were not always easy. But the colonies would slowly expand, claim even more land, have a few more wars with Europe, and even fight themselves at one point. They would fight in both of history's deadliest wars and emerge on top of the world. They would go on to battle the likes of Nazism, communism, and even terrorism. But none of this would have ever happened if the Founding Fathers did not come together to form the Constitution.